Great. So once again, I am Sophie Glovier, Assistant Director at the Watershed Institute. And we are going to be talking today about tools that exist to help municipalities with flooding, particularly focusing on the state's new requirement for a climate-related hazard vulnerability assessment when land use plans are updated, and some tools that are available from FEMA. Oh, Pri, would you advance my slide? I forgot that I couldn't do it. Thank you. So just a few webinar logistics. We are recording the webinar and you will receive the recording in a follow-up email after the program. The recording will also be available on our YouTube channel, and we would ask you, if you have colleagues that you think would be interested in this programming, please to share it with them, because we are really working to get the word out about ways in which municipalities can address their flooding issues and build resilience. If you have a question during the webinar, please use the Q&A feature. We may take some questions as we move through the program, or we may leave them to the end, depending on how we're doing for time. And thank you, as always, for being with us and participating. We like to start every program with a land acknowledgement. At the Watershed Institute, we recognize that the land and water now under our care is the traditional and ancestral territory of the Lenni Lenape. We pay respect to the Lenape peoples, past, present, and future, and their continuing presence in the homeland and throughout the Lenape diaspora. We respect their knowledge, culture, and tradition, which have contributed to the conservation of land and water. For those of you who may not yet be familiar with the Watershed Institute, our mission is to keep water clean, safe, and healthy. And we work to protect and restore the water and natural environment in central New Jersey using 4 different strategies: conservation, advocacy, science, and education. We have a science program. We have a very robust community water testing program. We look at chemical, biological, and bacterial health of water. We also design, install, and study green infrastructure. We work through advocacy, focusing our efforts at the municipal level and also at the state level. We have a wonderful environmental education program for students from 4 all the way up through senior citizens. And we model best stewardship practices at our Watershed Center and 950-acre watershed reserve. So please come and visit us if you're in the Pennington, New Jersey area. We are really pleased today to welcome 2 speakers. The first speaker is going to be Nick Angarone. Nick is New Jersey's Chief Resilience Officer and manager of the DEP's Bureau of Climate Resilience Planning. As Chief Resilience Officer, Nick coordinates statewide resilience policy and also serves as Vice Chair of the Interagency Council on Climate Resilience. He also leads and directs the development of the statewide climate change resilience strategy and provides technical guidance and support to local governments in their efforts to address the impacts of climate change. Our second speaker will be Jack Heidi. Jack is a supervisory community planner with FEMA Region II, serving New Jersey, New York, Puerto Rico, and the US Virgin Islands. He has a decade of planning experience working in local, state, and nonprofit positions. And prior to joining FEMA, Jack served in the US Army as a civil affairs officer, working on long-term redevelopment in Afghanistan. So with that, we're going to stop sharing our slides and give Nick the opportunity to share his screen. And don't forget to add your comments in the Q&A section, and I will keep an eye on that while Nick is speaking.
Thank you very much. It's nice to be here with you all this afternoon. I'm going to focus today on the last piece of my bio that Sophie mentioned, which was her vision of us, how we provide assistance to our local governments to begin to address the impacts, the current and expected impacts of climate change. I will say that I am a local resident. I live in Pennington. I'm in Pennington, in my basement in Pennington as we speak. And so I'm very happy to be presenting to this group today. I thought we were actually meeting in person, and I was like, this is going to be great. I got a five minute commute today, but we'll stick virtual for the moment. All good. All right. What I'm going to do is walk you through a tool that that the department has developed to assist communities go through local resilience planning. And so the simplest way to get there is to type in resilient.nj.gov, which will bring you to our Resilient NJ, our primary page for where we have most of our projects and these tools. Specifically, I'm talking about the Local Climate Resilience Toolkit today, but I will note that if you're interested in looking at our resilience planning projects around the state, our program documents and trainings that we have, you can also find them here on this page. So a quick bit of background on the climate change related hazard vulnerability assessment that Sophie referenced. So last year, New Jersey amended its municipal land use law to require that municipalities include in the update to their land use plan element of their master plan a climate change related hazard vulnerability assessment. And there's a couple of key components of what that vulnerability assessment needs to do, right? And so the most obvious of those is to look at, analyze the threats from climate change and the vulnerabilities to your communities, right? And those include everything from increased temperature and drought, all types of flooding, hurricanes, sea level rise, riverine flooding, right? When you do that, you want to make sure you're looking at your critical facilities, and this is a requirement, right? So your utilities and your roadways and other infrastructure. And this is the type of thing that when we do vulnerability assessments, right, that's the first thing we think about is, okay, well, let's look and see where our police stations and fire stations and our hospitals and our schools and our our major roadways are, and look at their vulnerability. But really what we want to make sure that we're looking at here, particularly in this context of the land use plan element, is all of our land use planning in our community. And so what's particularly interesting about this requirement is that municipalities are also required to do a build out analysis, the vulnerability of future build out, right? So you do a build out analysis of future residential, commercial, industrial, and other development in the community. And again, look at the vulnerabilities of future development to the vulnerabilities of climate change to that future development. There are other pieces in here that you find right in master plan requirements about consistency and policy statements and the like, but those are really kind of the core pieces. The two last pieces that I will note. One, the municipalities are required to use the most recent and best available science from DEP, which we have and are happy to provide to you in any number of ways. Similarly, the amendment to the MLUL required that at the request of a municipal planning board, DEP will provide technical assistance to help you develop this vulnerability assessment as practicable, meaning that we will provide you assistance, not necessarily do the work for you. Okay, but going over to the actual tool, this is the landing page for the Local Planning for Climate Change Toolkit. And I'm going to actually walk you through the website live so you can get an understanding of kind of how to navigate it and how it works. Across the top here are these what are 5 tabs. For each tab, there is a drop down that will bring you to subpages, and we'll go through some of these, right? These tabs, generally speaking, are what we consider to be a simple, logical planning process, right? You want to ensure that you are engaging your community in the process. You want to make sure that you're understanding your vulnerability. You want to develop the strategy for how you're going to address those vulnerabilities. And then you want to make sure that, right, we're not just planning, we want to make sure that we're implementing and kind of getting things done. And so I'll start with the overview. There is a fairly simple kind of how to use this tool page. And you'll see on many pages within the tool, within the page itself, there are additional tabs, as well as links. The tool itself is fairly resource heavy. So what I think what I will say here is there's a lot in this tool, in this toolkit. And while we attempted to write it at a level that what I will refer to as kind of your informed volunteer, right, could use, right? And I mean like your planning board members or your environmental commission members, while we wrote it kind of with them in mind as our audience, there is still a lot here. And it does take some time and effort to go through all of the resources that are available here. But so again, how to use the guide to kind of, introduction and basic pages. Climate Change in New Jersey does begin to identify some of the primary information about some of the primary climate impacts that we are seeing. And this information that is on these tabs is based on the scientific report on climate change that is available on the DEP climate change website, which I will include in the chat when I'm done with the presentation. But generally speaking is nj.gov/DEP/climate change. The New Jersey planning requirements. So I should also have noted that we were working on this toolkit, development of this toolkit, when the law, the MLUL was amended, when the law came out. So we did kind of modify things midstream, but we certainly believe that going through this process, you will absolutely be able to meet the requirements of the MLUL, the Climate Change Related Hazard Vulnerability Assessment. And so it does summarize that process here. It summarizes the plan endorsement process, which is done through the State Planning Commission and incorporates resilience, and does kind of make connections to hazard mitigation planning, which is done through coordination with your counties, New Jersey OEM, and FEMA.
And Nick, just to interrupt, there's a question. Is this a new element in a master plan, or is it folded into an existing element? So could you just explain that a little bit?
Right. So the core of your master plan is the land use plan element, right? And so that's where you talk about your vision and the land uses and your zoning. The climate change related hazard vulnerability assessment is required to be a part of the land use plan element. Okay. It is a critical part of the process to not only ensure that you are engaging your community throughout, but that you are paying particular attention on how to engage your socially vulnerable populations, how we are making sure that we are doing that engagement equitably, and making sure that we are not only engaging, but hearing and listening, and trying to address the issues of our neighbors who have historically not been welcome at the table, or whose issues we have not necessarily addressed. And so there is a specific toolkit within the toolkit, if you will, that provides resources to help you do equitable outreach and engagement. So as I noted, the toolkit is very resource heavy. There are a lot of links. Every one of the resources and links that is included in the toolkit is here on this resilience library page. So right as you're going through it and you can't remember where you saw a certain resource or link, you can come here and it'll be certainly a lot easier to scroll through this than try and go through every subpage of the toolkit and try and find that, that link. If it makes it easier for you, this is a sitemap, right? All the subpages of the site. And we don't need to look at the acknowledgements. All right, so the first step in this planning process, right, is initiate and engage in the process. So if you simply click on the tabs, it will bring you to a simple landing page. And then if you click on the down arrow, you will get to the subpages, right? And so again, kind of common sense, you want to build your team. You want to identify who's involved in the process, right? The public stakeholders or their technical experts who you have involved. It talks about how to develop your training, your team. Again, there are tools at the bottom of these pages to assist you in that process. How to identify stakeholders, and again, making sure that we're doing this equitably. If you're interested in advisory committees, right, some types of committees and kind of their role that you might want to consider. So I find it is always best in my experience to actually not just kind of like go and start engagement, but to kind of think through how you're going to actually do that and develop an actual engagement plan. And so again, there are resources here to help you do that, right? Good engagement includes communication. And so we want to incorporate a good communication strategy within that. And this gives you some examples of various ways to do that communication and outreach. And again, you will see throughout, we come back repeatedly to making sure we are doing inclusive and equitable engagement. And so there's, again, additional recommendations and assistance on this page. It's also, I think, critically important to actually, when you're doing this engagement, to talk through what your vision for your community is, right? We've seen all too often in the past that, what goes into these plans ends up becoming, right, like the mayor's vision for your community or the planning board's chair's vision for your community. You can make community visioning kind of as formal as or informal as you like, but we do think that it's a really critical piece to this, particularly as we start looking at kind of what the impacts to your community are going to be in the future and how you're going to respond to those impacts. And again, there are resources to help you through that, right? How you gather community input, some types of questions you might want to ask, right? And then again, how you do this specifically with climate change in mind. All right, so you've done it. You've started your engagement process. You've worked with your community to identify your vision, and now it's time to understand, okay, well, how are we vulnerable? And so again, there's general information on kind of what is a vulnerability assessment. I do think it's important to understand some definitions here, kind of, right, what the difference between, say, exposure versus vulnerability versus risk is. We do identify kind of the minimum requirements. And again, this is partially on the left here, kind of what's included in the municipal land use law, and some of the requirements for plan endorsement as an example. And then again, helpful tools and data. New Jersey, we are lucky enough to have a good amount of mapping tools and data specific to New Jersey, right, not the least of which is NJDEP out of Rutgers. But also there's, a wealth of federal resources and websites that are available, all of which can help you kind of go through your vulnerability assessment. gather your data, right? So I think an important part of resilience planning more generally, but also here, is you don't necessarily have to start from scratch. And you shouldn't start from scratch. Look at what you've done already, right? Most of your communities are going to have a portfolio of plans. Your existing master plan might very well identify your vision and your goals for your community that are still correct and consistent, right? But the challenge here is to now kind of look at that through a climate lens, but look at what you already have and understand what they say, but also how they kind of inform the process. There are some recommendations on how to do a build out analysis. If I'm completely honest, this is a place where we still need to work to develop tools to assist our communities in doing this work. As I noted earlier, kind of prioritizing your assets. We don't want this to simply be limited to kind of like the critical government services. We want to make sure that we're looking at right, our infrastructure. What are the economic assets that are going to be impacted? What are our health assets that are going to be impacted? Housing. Where is the location where like your community kind of gathers post-event, or where your community kind of gets all of its information, right? These are important places to consider when you're looking at their vulnerability. So going through an assessment. And so this is kind of looking at the types of assets that we've talked about and their vulnerabilities. Ooh, I should have downloaded that. Apologies. But this matrix helps you go through a process to kind of look at each asset, understand kind of like what the impact are from each of these major categories to help you prioritize and consider the impacts. This is a critically important part of this, right? Because it's not just simply, right, what's going to get wet, for example, right, if we talk about flooding, but kind of what is the actual impact going to be to your community when that facility, that asset experiences flooding. Again, make sure that you're getting stakeholder input into this. We want to make sure that you're getting, I will say, the small c, community input into what is important to them and understanding how they use these assets to understand what the true impact of climate change is going to be. There are additional, what we refer to as kind of advanced assessments. So some resources here. So, on increased precipitation, more frequent and high intensity storms and sea level rise, there is some specific guidance and data and science behind those issues where we delve into a little bit more detail here. Temperature, of course, is one that, right, is the basis of all of our climate vulnerabilities, and kind of, but not the one we necessarily think about first in New Jersey, right? We're frequently thinking first about flooding impacts. Let's also not forget about the health impacts of these events, right? Everything from that increased heat and precipitation and flooding, right? It's not just your built infrastructure and assets, right? This has direct physical impact to your neighbors and friends and community. All right, so that is understanding your vulnerability. And now, so what are you going to do about it? Right, and so I should have clicked there. Again, this is just the landing page. But understanding kind of what the situation is now, understanding your baseline and understanding kind of what the future looks like. And so start to develop that strategy. And the strategy should incorporate all types of responses, right? It does not have to be multi-million-dollar infrastructure projects. It can and should be looking at natural and nature-based features, looking at kind of the co-benefits of some of these projects and activities. It should be education and outreach, or continued education and outreach. And so these are all pieces that you want to consider. Be innovative, think outside the box, right? This is something that I think is really interesting, an interesting way to get your community engaged in this process. And what we have here is kind of an introduction to the types of resilience and adaptation responses. Every one of these has an example, or has examples. And you can look at kind of the strategy, the type of effects addresses, and the climate impacts addresses, as well as providing kind of the source document that you can look for more information. I will say that we are still working on this, and we do hope to make the source documents live links. So we go into kind of different types of actions here, right? And so again, other things types of actions you should be considering are kind of, right, your planning and regulatory, your zoning, your ordinances and the like. Making sure that you are looking at, community health. And again, there are resources at the bottom of each page to help you. Let's not forget about kind of the impact to our local and regional and state economy, right? It's not simply, again, is our Main Street going to be flooded? The Main Street itself might not be flooded, but it might get cut off, right? And what are the impacts to the business owners and businesses in that region? What are the impacts to your municipal budget, right? These are all important things to consider. And so we also look at, direct risk reduction types of activities. And this is, how we do kind of build our houses and buildings, and how we plan for and build our infrastructure. Again, infrastructure not simply being, our gray infrastructure, pipes and like, but we should consider green infrastructure, natural and nature-based features as infrastructure, and how we can both utilize them, but also kind of take advantage of the co-benefits that they provide to the community. Evaluating what you've developed, right, is also critically important, right? And so kind of going through a thorough evaluation and looking at, okay, well, have we aligned our plan with the vision, our community vision? Have we addressed equity? Have we reduced risk? Have we addressed kind of public health as well as economic impacts, right? Go through and kind of do that, take that step back and do that evaluation. And then of course, right, finalize your strategy, right? And again, there's specific requirements through different types of programs. But right, this is the end product, if you will. We do, however, I'm a planner, so I'm focused on the planning. But if we just develop an awesome, pretty document and it goes up and sits on a shelf, physical or metaphorical, right, it's not doing us any good. So we want to make sure that we're getting these actions implemented. And so this is under kind of the track your projects, your progress tab. And so what this does is identify some funding sources that you can utilize to implement or get some of your actions implemented. And we look at federal and state programs. We've really tried to identify federal and state programs that are permanent, long-standing, continuing programs. So you will not see, for example, kind of a lot of, listed here anyway, a lot of the one-shot funding opportunities that are coming out of, say, the infrastructure funding out of the federal government. But you can use some of these links to still get to them. We're in the awkward, but I guess good position of, right, not being able to kind of constantly update the pages here with all of the current funding sources. There's also kind of recognition that your local government can fund and finance resilience activities, and it does identify some ways to do that. Right, and so again, then there's kind of post-implementation, right, is making sure that what we've done worked. We want to monitor kind of the success and the impacts of our projects and actions. Again, specific consideration of how it's impacting our socially vulnerable populations. And then, right, making sure that we're linking this to other plans, making sure that we're communicating the progress of our successes and our challenges and even our failures. And so, you know, part of what some of the next steps might be here are actually kind of incorporating some of this into kind of your county hazard mitigation plans, right, and vice versa. So again, making those links, making sure that you're leveraging kind of the resources and opportunities that these opportunities provide. And so that is the toolkit. And I know I went through that really quickly and, you know, really high level. So I can answer questions now or at the end, whatever is preferred here.
Well, thank you, Nick, so much. And I just have to read you a comment. Where did my chat go? There was just a wonderful comment from Jean about what a good presentation this was and what an important topic. So thank you. I think that I'm going to ask Jack to share his screen so we can get started on his presentation. But while he does that, there's a question, can the watershed help us evaluate the strength of our plans? And we are always happy to offer assistance. But Nick, I know that when we were waiting to start the webinar, you were talking about the ability of your office to help municipalities. So maybe you just say a few words about that.
Sure. Right. In addition to kind of the tool that we went through, and we can help you kind of go through the process at your request. We do have I do have planners on staff who can provide you some technical assistance. We can identify and help you, identify and utilize kind of the best available science, the climate projections that you should be utilizing. And in some cases, we have some limited funding that we can provide to communities. So anyone is welcome to reach out to me, or there's also contact information through that Resilient NJ website.
Great, thank you. So over to you, Jack.
Thank you, and thanks, Nick, for a great presentation. I'm going to try to follow on to what Nick went over and make some of the connections to where FEMA has a connection to the new municipal land use law that went enacted in New Jersey. And just note that FEMA and New Jersey DEP is currently and for many years working together, and we are working together to make sure that some of these things where FEMA's interests are, where DEP's interests are, and other state agencies are, we're trying to align some of our resources and work together to make sure that we're all getting on the same page and we're not overwhelming all the municipalities with some of the same stuff. So just going forward, so the biggest connection for those of you that are familiar with it is the FEMA approved local hazard mitigation plans. This is the plans that local jurisdictions in New Jersey, at this point, all the hazard mitigation plans coming into New Jersey are county level, multi-jurisdictional plans. And when I say county level, it means that the county is submitting the plans, but every single community within the county jurisdiction has their own planning annexes to which each jurisdiction has contributed to. So it's a multi-jurisdictional plan, and it's not the county plan, it is multi-jurisdictional plans within a county jurisdictional framework. Sometimes even the counties, I feel, get confused by that. But it's just important to note. And I also note that on April 19th, we actually updated all our policies for the local hazard mitigation plans. And I'm going to go over some of those because there's some alignment with the work that New Jersey DEP is doing within this realm. So I just wanted to highlight this real quick because much like most community planning efforts that take place, this is the mitigation planning process as FEMA has laid it out in their policy and handbook. You can note that with the exception of a few wording changes, it looks almost exactly the same thing as the New Jersey tool that Nick just went over with. There are some nuances and differences between the tools, but at the end of the day, it's really about forming that planning team, working through your risks and vulnerabilities, developing strategies, and then implementing and monitoring. So I just wanted to highlight this. I think Nick went into great detail of what these sort of things go, and a lot of FEMA processes, the way FEMA recommends it, we train it, looks very similar. But again, a lot of our plans that are done across the United States are at a very higher multi-jurisdictional level. And so the amount of detail any one of these plans goes into any single jurisdiction can be somewhat limited. But we highly encourage, and we did throw our support behind the municipal land use law to show that like integration at the local level is between vulnerability assessments for climate change and other hazards is really where we ultimately would like to see the communities go. So to show some of the importance of the approved plan, from the FEMA perspective, you need an approved hazard mitigation plan because it leads to a whole bunch of FEMA funding opportunities. The biggest one right now going is the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities Grant, the BRIC grant, which last year had $1 billion available to communities competitively nationwide. But it also allows you access to things like the flood mitigation assistance, which is directly related to flooding mitigation, the hazard mitigation grant program, which is that money available after a major disaster, so presidentially declared disaster. So you can see a lot of every state and territory in the United States recently got a whole bunch of COVID money after they declared that a disaster under FEMA and opened it up for hazard mitigation. New Jersey also got a bit of money after Hurricane Ida impacts that occurred just this last year. We also have the HHPD, which is the High Hazard Potential Dams Grant, which is really focused on mitigating the risks we have from dams within the country. Fire mitigation assistance tends not to, although there is a big wildfire risk with the Pinelands, this one has, I don't think, ever been applied for in New Jersey. And then, of course, after a disaster, there is the public assistance program, which is where most of our money goes. But you have to have plans. The state has to have a hazard mitigation plan, and it does, in order to access this money, which goes beyond just categories A and B, or like administrative costs and emergency repairs, and to get all that other good stuff like fixing parks and bringing back to the previous level of function, things like water systems and sewers and municipal buildings and all that sort of thing. You have to have a plan in place. It also involves what we call 406 mitigation, which is not just putting those things back, but putting them back better and more resilient for future events. So that's kind of like the importance of having a FEMA approved hazard mitigation plan. So I wanted to touch base on some of the, as I mentioned on April 19th, these plans, the planning policy was updated. It actually doesn't go into full effect until next year, April 2023. We have a 1-year grace period. But I wanted to note that things like previously local plans were not required to consider the impacts of climate change or other future conditions. And with this policy update, they now now local hazard mitigation plans are required to address climate change and future conditions within all the hazards that might be impacted by or enhanced or changed by climate change. Another thing is there's now an enhanced language around making sure you're describing what building codes and land use and development ordinances you are using. So, and this particular one is very close to the municipal land use law, because now there's requirement that you do that within your master plan when you go and update that in New Jersey. So that's a great connection point right there. Some of the other things I'll note is this idea, we also include a lot more language around this idea of community lifelines. I'll touch base on this a little bit more, but community lifelines are those things that help our community run or stay running in a normal condition pre and post disaster. They include things like, the water system, public safety, electric grid, things like that. So there's an enhanced language of making sure that our plans are addressing the entire community and not just say, what we've seen in the past is a lot of plans that tend to only address things like making sure emergency services are up and running, like making sure the fire station has a generator, or making sure the municipal building, the main municipal building, is maybe elevated or moved from the floodplain. We are highly encouraging looking at the entire community. A lot of those, and engaging in some of those sectors that have not been engaged before, like Nick mentioned the public health sector. We are also now encouraging that level of engagement with the whole community. So I wanted to step back. So there's the hazard mitigation plans that are required at the local level. And when I say required, I'll say if you want FEMA funding or the opportunity to pursue FEMA funding, they are required, but there is no actual requirement that you go through this. It's an entirely voluntary process. But every county in New Jersey is covered. There are a handful of towns that have chosen not to participate. Why? We don't know. We ask every time they come up, and they don't give us an answer of why they don't want to participate, but they don't, so we leave them alone. So at a higher level, at FEMA wide, I just wanted to note FEMA's strategic plan, which was just released this last year, or at the beginning of this year, actually. Sorry, with COVID, all the years are just blending together with me now. So the strategic plan identifies these three main overall objectives, which is to instill equity as a foundation of emergency management. But the second piece there, lead whole of community in climate resilience. That's really where we're getting a big push. So equity and climate change issues, which you can see in the work that the tool that Nick went over. There's a heavy emphasis, especially on climate change, but also on making sure we have equitable outcomes. And FEMA is pursuing those same goals now. It's embedded into our strategic plan. It's starting to come out in all of our policy. It's noted in the policy updates for the local hazard mitigation plan. So we also are engaging in this process. The other thing I want to go over is to note, I mentioned the BRIC grant, the Building Resilient Infrastructure in Communities. These are its guiding principles. So these things like support for community capability, encourage and enable innovation, promote partnerships. And this grant program, I'm going to go into some of the further details of how we're looking at projects and how we're scoring them in the national competition, the national competitive nature of the grant, because there's connections there as well. Before I go into that, though, I want to note, because this Lifelines piece is also a part of the BRIC. These are the 7 lifelines as identified by FEMA. Particularly to this group, I'm assuming that the water, you see that food, water, shelter, that's where drinking water and wastewater and other things where water is connected comes in. There's a whole bunch of sub lifelines underneath all of these, so it's not just food, water, shelter. There's categories for food, like agriculture, and food shelter, food pantries, things like that. Shelter talks about housing. You go over to transportation, you can see you got highways, bridges, airlines. So there's a lot here, even though there's 7. But now let's transition over to talking about some of the BRIC. We have 2 sets of criteria. One is a technical criteria and one is a qualitative criteria. And you can see here, it is focused on infrastructure projects. We like to see projects that mitigate risk to more than one lifeline. So if you can find ways that address drinking water in the power grid, you're that much more competitive. We like to see multi-beneficial projects that address multiple lifelines and help fix. We also, the incorporation of nature-based solutions. So this isn't just saying like, yes, we want to see nature-based solutions to the problems. We also want to see them incorporated into the bigger infrastructure projects as well. So it's not just here's a nature-based solution, it's let's incorporate that into a multi-beneficial solution for these communities. See, I'm trying to see. So those are sort of the connected pieces within the technical criteria. And then if you go to our qualitative criteria, we have these things like risk reduction, resilience, effectiveness, climate change, noting how you're addressing climate issues within your projects. And a lot of that work is going to come from the planning you do in your vulnerability assessments and what climate information and data you use. I'll note that you noted that the MLUL law requires that you use the best available data. You guys are really lucky in New Jersey. New Jersey has some really great quality data. FEMA, it's not law, but FEMA also has a lot of within our policies that you use the best available data to you. And with New Jersey, we consider a lot of the work that that New Jersey's been doing through Rutgers and DEP, that is the best available data for New Jersey. And so when we're looking at our plan review, when we're looking at our project reviews, we're looking to see that you're using the data that luckily the state of New Jersey has worked very hard on and produced a lot of great information. And so there's another connection there. We're also looking at population's impact. So there is a requirement to make sure that if you're helping an underserved community, so hopefully you've identified your underserved communities through your equitable planning processes, that you will also start to see more points. And then leveraging partnerships has it's a mix of not just noting that hopefully you're working not just with the municipal government working on its own to produce these solutions, but you're also working with the private sector, nonprofit sector, other federal and state partners to actually help make these projects happen. It also wants to see planning integration. It wants to see that when you're talking about what your vision is, your plan, why this project is important, that it's considering this vision for the community, why it's important to the community. It's not just mitigation for the sake of mitigation, which sometimes I personally feel that's what a lot of mitigation projects are. They're just mitigating for the point, without truly understanding this holistic view of your community and what you're trying to achieve. Making connections, also the National Flood Insurance Program. So that's where we have our floodplain mapping, our floodplain management, and our floodplain insurance. The important connection here is the community rating system, which for those of you that aren't familiar, this is if your community is a participating jurisdiction of the National Flood Insurance Program, you can enroll in the community rating system, and you do a bunch of you do some planning, some outreach, some projects. There's a whole list and realm of activities you can do that will reduce the flood premium prices for everyone in the community that has flood insurance. It just automatically applies. New Jersey has some great towns pursuing this. I think we have all the way up to maybe a 4 now in New Jersey, I think, which that is like, it's like 30% off the flood insurance premiums for all their communities. The connection here again is when you're doing your hazard mitigation planning, and now, although I don't think we've done this analysis yet, but I'm pretty sure that if we did, we could probably go this direction. There is within the CRS program and the points you get called the 510 section, which is where we look at what you're doing in terms of planning and vulnerability assessments to get points to help meet the criteria to get lower level rating in the community rating system. Going from a 6 to a 5 or 5 to a 4, whatever levels you're at. So we're looking at that comprehensive approach to floodplain management. We're looking at the going above and beyond. This municipal land use law, if you have an approved one from the state, You're using that information not just there, but in your hazard mitigation plan, and you're using your hazard mitigation plan information in your municipal master plan, then it's going to help enhance and encourage this idea of the community rating system and reducing flood insurance premiums. Now, I just wanted to cover a couple of resources before I end. I'm trying to be quick. I know we're almost at the end of time. In 2020, we developed this guide, the mitigation resource guide, for each of our states and territories within Region 2. This is a resource for you to look at potential mitigation project money that is not just FEMA. This covers a number of other federal agencies, state agencies, and to an extent even nonprofits and the philanthropies where you can pursue mitigation money. We like to say mitigation, FEMA, we're the most known for mitigation. We don't have nearly enough money for everyone, just like everyone else. And we're not the only player in town that does mitigation or things that are mitigation, but maybe aren't directly. So this resource can help you identify other potential sources of funding. And then I'll cover briefly our guides to expanding mitigation. And I love that I saw one of the guides in the resources for the New Jersey, the planning tool that Nick went over. These are a series of guides that cover a range of topics where we're trying to just connect the idea of mitigation to a sector. And you can see there's a wide variety here. I think we're up to 14 currently. We're going to be releasing ones on older adults that we actually did with AARP. But the basic idea here is that you have sectors that aren't actively being involved in the community. It's really trying to broach this idea of whole community. And you can see we talk about things like municipal financing. We even have cemeteries guide. We've got things like electric power. And one of the reasons I bring this up for this group is our intention is in the future to actually work with EPA to co-brand someone specific to water, drinking water, wastewater, other things within the water sector to help enhance and bridge this idea of mitigation across a lot of different things. Within the guides, you find insights into the sector, the potential vulnerabilities specific to that sector, engagement resources and data, ideas for planning and projects, and examples of successful collaboration. This is where you can find them if you want to pull out your phone and pull them up real quick. And with that, I will stop because I'm trying to get us so we can answer questions.
Jack, thank you very much for all that great information. So we do have a question here. I think this might be for you, Nick. What are the ramifications if a town doesn't have a climate element in their master plan?
That is surprisingly not as, or maybe unsurprisingly, not a simple question. So one, if you get an opportunity to go and look at the actual language in the MLUL, you will see that it is fairly, I don't want to say vague, but fairly simple, right? It does not, the municipal land use law does not go into an extreme amount of detail. And so there is some question amongst the planning community even, kind of when it is actually required, right? So it is absolutely required, very clearly states in the law that if you update the land use plan element of your master plan, you have to do this, right? And so if you're updating your master plan, you're going to do it. However, that's not what most communities in New Jersey do now, right? Most communities at this point are doing a re-examination every 10 years. And so my current understanding, and I am not a land use attorney, I am a land use planner, but not an attorney, and please do not take this as legal advice. My understanding is if you are simply doing a re-examination report in its simplest form, right, there is not the legal requirement to do the vulnerability assessment. If you, however, are doing the re-examination report that also amends your master plan, there is the expectation that you do the vulnerability assessment, right? So there's even some gray area here, kind of the ramifications. So there's a couple, right? There are state programs, for example, that might require or incentivize that you have this. And so there might be some ramifications as to other types of funding. Again, from the legal perspective, there is no, say, for example, state agency, there's no state authority in New Jersey that reviews and like your master plan to determine if it's current and up to date and meets all the legal requirements. Generally speaking, where this becomes an issue is if your municipality makes a decision that is inconsistent with its master plan, and then there's a legal challenge. And that's really where kind of the legal ramifications kind of come in here. But I really hesitate to go into more kind of more depth there. I don't, not being kind of an attorney or expert on that specific question.
We get a lot of community members, unsurprisingly, contacting the Watershed Institute concerned about the flooding in the community. And it seems like a great opportunity to go and make a public comment at the planning board or with your local elected body about the importance of undertaking one of these and really to see if you can get it on the municipal to-do list, whether or not it's time to update your master plan, right?
Right, and that's a good point. You don't have to wait until you update your master plan to do this. Most of the communities that I've seen go through the process so far have not been kind of at your 10-year update requirement. They've been doing it kind of in process. There are also, for example, I pointed to plan endorsement, right, which is a voluntary process through the State Planning Commission, where doing this is a requirement to get plan endorsement from the State Planning Commission. So there are other ways that this will happen as well.
Great, thank you. And then for Jack, you said that there are 4 municipalities, I believe, in New Jersey that are part of the community rating system. Is that correct?
No, there's actually many communities.
Okay, good.
In New Jersey. I was saying, I believe there's at least one. I think it's Sea Isle City is a class 4 CRS community. Don't quote me on that. That's not my program area, so I can't. I believe they are. I can't remember fully. Okay.
I just wanted to emphasize that it's a really great program to be part of, and I was hoping that we had well more than 4 municipalities in that. Does anybody have any other questions? There was a good question that I don't think everybody saw just because of the way the Q&A function works about tornadoes and how we've been recently experiencing tornadoes. And Nick, do you want to just answer that for everybody so they can hear that answer?
Right. So Andrew's question was about the toolkit being very water flooding focused, and that we've all experienced a number of tornado warnings, in the last few years. And as Andrew notes in his question, right, it's not something that we've experienced regularly and historically frequently in New Jersey. So one, I will say kind of it is a gap, right? Because it is not something that has been a major vulnerability, or again, relatively speaking, kind of something that happens very frequently. It's not something that New Jersey has focused on, to be completely upfront. And it's something that, it has certainly surprised me, right? Also running to my basement multiple times in the last 2 years, actually running down to my basement, being down there for the tornado and seeing the water rise in my backyard from Ida. Anyway, it's a gap that we need to address. What I also say in the answer there, right, is we focus on flooding so much because it is the hazard that most impacts New Jersey, right? From kind of frequency and scale and damage, right? And so that's why there's a focus on flooding. That's why we have really good data on it. That's why we have good mapping and tools to do it. And right, I think a good example of this, right, is post Sandy, we spent a lot of time, the state, local governments, federal government, a lot of time and resources, and still are, on understanding sea level rise and kind of the impact from coastal storms and what that's going to do. And so we did not have a great understanding of kind of what a storm like Ida would do to New Jersey. And so, you know, we're always a little behind the ball with Mother Nature. We are, though, doing a good amount of work on this front. And so I will note in the last several months, DEP has, in cooperation with our partners at Rutgers and Cornell, developed or done research and developed reports, kind of updating our precipitation data, but also kind of looking at what the projections will be. New Jersey is also, DEP is also about to, this month, propose emergency regulations that recognize that our planning and regulatory framework is not prepared for the increase in precipitation and stormwater and fluvial flooding that we are going to experience. And so you will see in the next 2 weeks, I believe, rules that come out that are emergency rules. They will be immediately effective, that require that put additional requirements on development in or near kind of what we understand to be kind of the current floodplain, right? Ida in some parts of New Jersey was the quote unquote 1,000-year event. We look at mapping and align it with the FEMA flood insurance mapping, right? It aligns very much with very closely to the 500-year event. Well, New Jersey's experienced, you know, 3 500-year events in the last 20 some years. So we have to recognize that we're not prepared for this type increased events, and start developing our buildings, our development, our housing, our infrastructure now based on the projections, the future projections that we're going to see from climate change.
Thank you. Well, we so appreciate all that you are doing to help municipalities adapt to these changes in climate. I see, Mike, you just came on screen. So something you wanted to add?
Oh, I have a couple questions. I'm going to take the prerogative. Jack, you mentioned, Sea Isle City was a class 4 for the community rating system. And maybe I missed it. Can you talk about what the classes are and what that really means?
Yeah, so there are 10 classes with every, you want to go numerically down, the better the better you get. So you go from a 10 to a 9, you're that much better. Anyone who enters at a 10, nobody's getting a discount. But as you work your way down, every subsequent step is another 5% reduction in flood premiums for everyone that is a homeowner with flood insurance in that town. And with each step, there's points there are activities you have to do to get points. And you get so many points, you can go down a step. There are some activities that are required to go down to get a higher CRS level. I believe to go from like a 5 to a 4, you have to have like watershed planning analysis done. And that can be a struggle for a lot of communities to do. But that's like an example. Issuing proper elevation certificates gets you points. There's all sorts of things, activities. And as you go up higher, it becomes progressively more difficult to reach it. I think currently there's only one to 3 communities in the entire country that are a CRS class 1. I know one is in California and another one is King County, Washington. But it's a lot of work to get there.
All right. And there was a question in there. So the U is the municipality or, you know, the region, not necessarily an individual, or is there things individuals can do to help their rating?
So I did
Oh.
respond to that in the chat thing, but I'll say that I apologize for the use of the word you, but risk reduction is everyone's responsibility. As you can see, home elevations are done at which FEMA pays for a lot of, but that's still an individual homeowner's action, versus, you know, large infrastructure, flood walls, or, you know, things like that. That's a municipal level, even state level action, and there's everything in between. So it's really meant for everyone. Most of FEMA's audience is the state and the local municipalities, but we try to talk to everyone.
Add something there. All right, I think kind of Jack's getting to an important point here, right? So, right, Jack's works with the federal government. I'm with state government. You know, we can do things at kind of at our level that help local government, right? Where a lot of the decisions are going to happen that to determine whether New Jersey, whether the country is resilient and adapts to climate change. But I think we need to recognize that it doesn't only have to happen at that scale, right? We don't need it's not just $16 billion Army Corps projects right down the shore. That's not the only way we adapt and become resilient to climate change. It's not just, you know, local municipal plans. It should not be just local municipal plans, right? Everything that we do, every rain garden, every tree that we plant has an impact on and I'm just talking about kind of resilience and adaptation here, not even kind of the greenhouse gas mitigation aspects. Every one of these little things has an impact, right? A positive impact. The rain garden is going to address some of the stormwater flooding that you see, right? The more trees we plant, the more we're going to address kind of the extreme heat issues, right? Which is particularly an issue for our, you know, urban and socially vulnerable populations. So I don't want people to ever walk away from one of these conversations thinking that they can only rely on federal action or state action or even their municipal action. And they should work with organizations like you. They should work, you know, doing things in their own backyard. Right? You don't need me to go plant a tree, although the state does have resources to help you plant trees. So, right, every one of us can do something, and every little bit helps, and helps not just us individually, but helps our community as a whole.
Great. Yes, great. And I appreciate it. And, you know, everyone can stand up. You know, there was a question about updating and incorporating this stuff into the land use plan. You know, standing up at your council meeting or your planning board meeting or your EC meeting and, you know, demanding that the municipality do it and do it right, and being there to help engage in that conversation. You know, Nick, you started off with, you know, the engagement aspect. So, I mean, that is extremely important. Nick, DEP released, maybe about a month or so ago, the extreme precipitation map, or GIS. I know we're sort of running out of time, but can you talk a little bit about that and how that's going to be helpful?
Yeah, so the precipitation data or studies that I referenced, so there were two studies. They did two things. One, most of the data that we are currently using now, present day, to develop, you know, to engineer our projects and infrastructure is based on data that was last published in 1999 by NOAA. And such, the data is even older. So we're designing projects now based on, at best, 1990s data. We're not developing for the storms we're seeing today, let alone going forward. And so the second study looked at kind of what are the increases in, again, extreme precipitation events, like your 10-year storm, your 100-year storm, what the increase in those events is going to be. And so what we've seen, kind of thinking about it from kind of the statewide and a county perspective, is up in the northeast of the state, you're going to see by the end of the century, you're going to see increase in extreme precipitation events increase by up to 50%. That's a massive, massive impact. In our area, it was a little less, and down the shore, some areas down the shore, it was in the 25%. 25% is still a significant impact, right? We are already seeing and are going to see this type of increase. So the map you're referring to, we took that data and put it into a tool that allows you to look at your location, your community, your municipality, and see what the projections are. It's not necessarily, it's not going to be able to tell you kind of at your house kind of what the impact you're going to see is, but you can look at your community and see kind of like what the charts are going to tell you about of what you can expect to see in the future. The link I just put in the chat, if you scroll, so one, you can see that's where the scientific report on climate change is located. That's where the best available science that we refer to comes from. But just under that, if you scroll a little bit, are the studies and the link to that mapping tool.
Great, thank you. I mean, that was a very powerful graphical representation of what we're experiencing as well as what we're going to. You know, you can look at the charts and the numbers, but you know, that's very, very visual. All right, Sophie, you want to close this out?
Sure. If you would just put up our final slide, which will give you the information about our next Technical Friday. But while she is doing that, I just want to again thank Jack and Nick for joining us to talk about this really important topic. And we at the Watershed will certainly be working to get this content out to all of the municipalities that we work with, and encouraging them certainly to embark on a climate vulnerability hazard assessment. So thank you, Pri. Our next Technical Friday will be on July 8th. Oops, it's coming. There we go. From 12 to 1:15, we'll be talking about how citizen lawsuits are handled in New Jersey with Eastern Environmental Law Clinic. So we hope that you will all join us for that. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah. And I will add, I'm gonna, for those attorneys or for those people who you know are attorneys and looking for continuing legal education credits, we are going to apply for approval to provide those for those credits. So, you know, it's an important topic, and I look forward to that one. Again, Jack, Nick, thank you so much for this presentation, and thank everyone for attending.